Do you know what the latest science says about how you can grow as an athlete and enjoy your sport more? Well, the aim of this podcast is to dive into the science, take out some aspect of it, look at it, and then apply it in a real world way to you in the hope that you can do just that. Get more out of your sport. I'll be having these conversations every week with my fellow coach, Scott Finley, who is also a PhD student, so understands that scientific background, but also works in the real world with real athletes just like you. And so we will try and apply the scientific knowledge to you in your real world environment in the hope that it's helpful. So we hope that you enjoy the conversation that you're about to listen to and that it helps you get the most out of your sport.
Okay, hello and welcome back to the Elevate Multisport Academy podcast. I'm back here with Joel. My name is Scott, and we are here to look at another paper. Joel, how are you getting on today?
Yes, good. Thank you, Scott. A good Thursday, busy day, but happy to be recording again because it's been a while since we've done this. So nice to be back on the podcast.
Good. Okay, so as I said, today we're looking at another paper. This one is focused on ultra endurance athletes. Title of the paper is Does Ultra Endurance Passion Make Athletes Happy? So we're going to go straight into some quickfire questions. So Joel, can passion be a good and a bad thing?
Yes, it can.
Does ultra endurance mean better or just different?
Does ultra endurance mean better or just different?
Or your own answer. Doesn't necessarily need to be one of those.
I'll go for different. It's a good enough word for now. We can expand later.
Okay. And a bit more of a personal one. What's the longest time you've spent doing a single event or training session?
Oh, I love that question. So it's 11 hours and 40 minutes. Outlaw iron distance event 2011. Probably the longest thing I'll ever do.
I did not know you'd done that. So there we go. Learning something new every day.
There we go. I've done the longest slightly broken thing was as a fundraiser once. I did 9 hours on a turbo every day for 5 days, which was utterly grim and broke me for about 3 months afterwards. But in kind of one shot, that the Ironman was it.
Yeah, I don't much fancy that on the turbo.
Nah.
Okay, so we'll move on to the some information about the study. Just really quickly, the aim of the study was to identify the main contributors to happiness and passion of non-professional ultra endurance athletes, and to explore the possible relationships between types of sport passion, motivation, and athletic identity. So they had 116 athletes, 91.5% of them were runners, 6.9% cyclists, and the rest were triathlon, skiing, and canoeing. Just quickly, ultra endurance might mean something to some people and something totally different to others. So the definition they used in the paper was an ultra endurance race is defined either by a distance exceeding the marathon distance, so that's 42.2, or a racing time exceeding 6 hours. And then they list a whole number of sports, but obviously the most common being running, cycling, triathlon, etc. So, okay, before we get into the paper properly,
I have a question.
Go for it.
So my question to you would be, is that 6 hour definition of ultra endurance, do you think that that's a fair reflection on or a fair definition for ultra endurance sport?
I think coming from a 70.3 background, I would take it to be longer than that, but I don't know. So I would think Ironman or Iron Distance is slightly more ultra endurance compared to 70.3. I think so. Maybe the cutoff for 70.3 is that sort of 7-8 hour mark, something like that.
Okay.
So that would fit into that category.
And that's interesting because I go the other way on it. So my previously understood definition of ultra endurance is 4 hours or more, because that's actually not far below kind of average marathon time. But it certainly is an amount that can't be fueled. Oh, sorry, you have to fuel it. Like you can't keep going for 4 hours on no fuel, no hydration. So it's when the body really is depleted beyond its own natural resources, and needs help to continue to move, particularly move at a pace. So when I was reading this, I was thinking, I think the definition is a little bit too strict, and that some people might, who are doing kind of 3.5, 4.5 hour activities, challenges, events, might actually fit into this ultra endurance bracket as well.
Yeah, I don't, and maybe it is just my background. I think the fueling idea is interesting, and I don't know what. So they did reference where they got this definition from. So it'd be, and maybe I'll dive into that a little bit and see, what it's based on, because it might be that it's fuel based, or the most common length of race based, or something like that. So no, that's interesting. Ultimately, there doesn't seem to be a consensus. There's no real agreement about what motivates people to do ultra endurance racing. As, to me, surely that's not a surprise, because people are so individual, and maybe they're doing this for their own reasons.
I think that's probably fair. People are going to arrive at any type of pursuit for a whole multitude of reasons. So I would imagine it would be very difficult to pin down, any one or even a few particular types. The only thing that I would say as a caveat to that is that depending on how we define ultra endurance competition, it is quite a specific mode of sport. So you could say it's fairly demanding. I think I'm trying to think of sort of one word to summarize it. So it's demanding in that the physical load is high, the mental load is high, the time needed is significant. Therefore, the impact on wider life is going to be really significant too. You could become really, again, I'm going to try and pick my words carefully. You could become really engaged with 5K running, or playing tennis or something else. The physical demand might be high, but because it just isn't such a long event, the mental load might be less, and certainly the time commitment is less. So my point is that therefore, ultra endurance competition, again, depending on how we define that length of time, does suggest a particular type of attitude, personality, characteristics, and attract a particular group of people that might be after a particular thing that somehow meshes with that high demand sport. It's not an easy option. So so that's a caveat to that. I think there are probably lots of motivations, but I do wonder if we could pick certain things out when we looked at that subgroup, because it's quite a specific load.
Yeah, because I mean, you mentioned tennis, which can famously go on for quite a long time, but
Yep.
so maybe the topic is ultra endurance racing specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe rather than ultra endurance sport, because maybe something like tennis is fairly stop start intermittent exercise, rather than this continuous nature.
It is, and it's also multifaceted. So again, if we like tennis could be an ultra endurance event, right? The famous match at Wimbledon that went on for 3 days, or any kind of 5-set match, again at championships right now, even with the tiebreak system that they have in place, can go on for 3, 4, potentially 5 hours. They can be long matches, they can meet an ultra endurance definition, but they are a game that's played, and they are skill based and occupy a multifaceted range of fitness parameters. Whereas when we think of the classic ultra endurance model, we're usually thinking about running, could be running or cycling, could be swim, bike, and run. But we're again talking about long, slow, and steady in a straight line, far more so than a game that's played with various different fitness parameters as part of it.
Yeah, no, I like that definition and caveat. Move it on to passion, or sort of a sideways move to passion and motivation. In the paper, they say passion is defined as a strong inclination toward an activity that people like, that they find important, and which they invest time and energy. I mean, that's fairly summarizes passion. For me, I'm quite happy with that.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Do you want to have a little chat about how people can maybe use that motivation and passion? Maybe, for example, people work a standard 9 to 5 in the office. They're not able to get out and train when they feel passionate or feel the motivation to go and train. So they come home maybe exhausted and maybe don't have that same level of passion. How can people sort of manage and manipulate that motivation and passion?
Interesting question. I would be keen to get your thoughts and then maybe kind of riff off the back of some of those.
Yeah, I think for me, I know this feeling all too well, and I think one of the big things is scheduling things in, so you know exactly when something's happening. It does mean though that when motivation suddenly strikes, maybe you're listening to a song at work and you think, oh, I'd really like to go for a run. Maybe you can't because you know that you've got a run scheduled later on. So it's about managing it and maybe what we'll get into later on, maybe the sort of just striking while the iron's hot is what can lead to the obsessive passion that we'll talk about in a bit.
I think acknowledging what your passions are has to be the start point of this. So I'm sort of aware of people who I can think of who might not be able to tell you what their passion is. And I think that, it doesn't have to be sporting at all, but I'm pretty sure that there is something in all of us that we are or could get or have been really passionate about. And we know that things like, purpose are massively beneficial to health. Like not having purpose, is akin to, someone smoking quite a few cigarettes every day. It physiologically affects our health. So if we can identify our passion, then we can indulge it. And I think that it's a really important thing to do. It's a life affirming thing to do. It's not being selfish, because we get into, our phase of life, Scott, right? We've got jobs, we've got kids, we've got responsibilities, and it can be very easy to sideline those things that feel selfish, sideline our passions. I think it's really important, again, whether they're sporting or not, that people feel and understand that it's really important to identify what those passions are and to make space and time and energy for them. And if we're at a point in our life where we don't have the energy and time to indulge the kind of core passions that we have, then we're probably too tired, too busy, and haven't allocated our finite resources in the way that we should. That's going to be just like any training, right? That's going to be sustainable. We have to make our life sustainable and enriching over the long term, or else we're just going to burn out.
Yeah, no, that's a good follow up. Thank you for that.
Excuse me interrupting the conversation for just 20 seconds. If you're new to the platform, there are 3 things you can do. When you finish listening to the podcast, take our 6 keys to unlocking your potential course. It's completely free. Then please sign up to the Team Elevate community. It's a great place to meet like-minded athletes who are on a learning journey just like you. And thirdly, if you liked what you found, you can sign up to our monthly membership plan, which gives you access to all of our resources, both now and in the future. So we hope to see you there soon.
So let's assume that people do have this passion.
Yep.
This paper talks about 2 different types of passion. So they've got harmonious and obsessive. They call it the dualistic model of passion.
Okay. So they have a passion for ultra endurance sport. That's what they've identified. But that passion comes in 2 different forms. And we've got as you say, harmonious or obsessive. They're the 2 different types. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And so in this study, in this example, obsessive passion was linked to lower levels of happiness. My suspicion is that there may be a very fine line between the harmonious and obsessive passion. What's your thoughts on that?
Really interesting question. So I'd like to throw it back to you in a minute, but just so I don't make a habit of it, because I did that on the last question. I think that that's true. And I think that we can have a passion in a particular thing. And I think this is where the research is as well. And I think this is where, a counselor or therapist would come from, is that we can have a passion for a particular thing. But depending on our mental and mood state, depending on a whole load of other factors in life, that thing that we have a passion for can become either a kind of a really healthy thing for us to do. It can become life affirming. It can help us to feel present in our daily lives. It can be just, a positive thing for us. Or exactly the same activity could be a numbing coping mechanism that we are simply doing because of obsession and habit that actually won't leave us happier and won't leave us with better mental health. And over time could reduce our mental health as well, which is something drawn out in this study that, happiness goes down, but also mental health goes down. And I think, again, a couple of the words that are used in this study is we define this obsessive tendency by activity, so sporting activity, in this case, ultra endurance sport, it dominates life and it's compulsive. Like you feel like you have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going out the door to do some ultra endurance activity because you love it and it's good for you and it's good for your life, then it's probably a harmonious passion on that day. On another day, if you are going out simply because of the compulsion that you have to go out, and that by doing it is going to dominate some other aspect of your life, potentially negatively impacting that, then it's probably the same thing, right? Going for a run, the same physical act has probably obsessive. So I wonder if we need to be very vigilant and mindful day to day as to how we conduct ourselves, particularly in ultra endurance sport, so that it is more often than not harmonious and less often obsessive. Questions for you. Does that make sense? And does that in any way relate to your thought about them being quite closely related?
Yes, first point, yes, it makes sense. And I think that I can only take from, maybe what I've read or my own experiences. And in my own experience, there's always times where you don't want to go out and train, but you force yourself because of this. You've got a race coming up, you've paid for the race, whatever, or, you want to improve yourself, or whatever the reason is that you manage to force yourself out the door. That's probably the worst it's got for me, where you don't want to do something, but you force yourself out and you still feel better for it. Mm-hmm. So that's still a sort of harmonious outcome. And it's potentially bordering on that line that we're talking about there, because you don't want to do it in the moment. But that's the same with a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about anxiety before. A lot of times you don't want to do something because you're anxious about it. You do it, you feel so much better for it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, no, I think it's a difficult one, because and as you said, it can probably change day to day.
Mm-hmm.
I think if someone is truly an obsessive passion, has obsessive passion, they may well be stuck in that. I'm not going to say rut. They may well be in that area all the time. Whereas possibly dipping in and out isn't such a big thing. Maybe in a couple of months before you lead up to a race, you're sacrificing a bit of external life happiness for sporting success.
Yeah.
Balancing act, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I think it's understanding what's going on in you. So why are you forcing yourself out the door? And is it the correct response to how you feel inside? And then also it's to do with understanding the motivation for that. And I think it's really important for people, especially those involved in high demand sports like ultra endurance activity and sports and challenges, to understand why they're doing it. What is their motivation? And crucially, not just what their motivation is, but does it sit intrinsically or extrinsically? Because in this study, it suggests that intrinsic motivation, which is based on growth and good mental health, you know, maybe the social side or whatever, is much more powerful and much more linked to happiness and that harmonious passion than an extrinsic motivation, where essentially you're doing it for, and this is the big red flag for a lot of people, results, performance, outcome, or some kind of social standing, or perceived position amongst your community, or even just by strangers, which is mad.
Yeah.
But we've all fallen into that, right? Like, you want to have someone who you've maybe never met before, or you don't even know that well, think a particular way about you. And if anyone is starting to fall into that line of thinking, if that's the reason they're getting out the door, then that suggests that that's becoming an obsessive passion. um we hear all the time, don't we, about sort of as well, obsession is good. Like, Olympics has just finished, Paralympics is on now. And you will hear people talk about, yeah, the obsession of all of that. But this study suggests that what obsession leads to is a lack of happiness, poor mental health, kind of potentially a big impact on like your social life and all sorts of other aspects of mental well-being. So the question is, do we aren't those things important? Surely we want to hang on to as many of those things as we can, because my suggestion would be that a happy athlete who's intrinsically motivated and whose mental health is good will perform better ultimately. So we can have high performance and we can have happiness by adjusting where our motivation sits.
Yeah. No, and it actually takes me back to one of the first comments I made, which was about there wasn't a general consensus about what motivates these ultra endurance athletes, but one of the most common ones was life purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So that's that intrinsic motivation that's keeping these guys going. So that ties in really well there. Just maybe last thing on obsessive passion, something that they noted in the study was that people with higher obsessive passion had lower numbers of children in the home.
Okay.
So this will maybe lead us on to the next topic, but do you think that is that purely down to time, or do you think that might be aspects of, they've got different identities on the go as well? So a parent maybe doesn't have the mind space to be an obsessive passion.
Yeah, every case is going to be different, isn't it? So we can't possibly make a judgment call that's going to be, applicable across all people groups and to all individuals. We also have to think, whether is that cause or effect. If people have taken the race blueprint course on the Elevate platform, they'll recognize that I speak about divorce rates amongst Ironman athletes and the research that there is around that, and that the proportion is thought to be higher amongst. So now we're talking about ultra endurance sport again. So
Yeah.
for simplicity, rather than ultra endurance and Ironman, let's treat those as one and the same thing. Divorce rate is higher essentially because people's capacity to do that sport, this is where I speak about it in the course, people's capacity to do that sport, they don't have the capacity to absorb all of the training and all of the effort and all of the stress and all that it takes to do something that's that long, that's that hard, that takes that long to prepare for. And so there are only two outcomes. One of those is you don't achieve the goal. So or you achieve it really badly and it's a huge struggle because you could never get in the shape, right? Or you do achieve the goal, you do the work, you do get the performance or whatever it is that you want out of it. But to do that, you break something else because there's not enough room, right? So something has to shift. And that can often be home life and marriage. And so that can mean that, if divorce rate is high, sometimes that could equate to that stat about, children in the house. That's a very negative look at that. It could just be that people who don't have kids have more free time, so they do longer sports, right? It could be easy and simple, but it could be either one of those things. And I think when people start to be compulsive, that starts to make me think that then their sport is going to marginalize some of those other things in life that could be more important and certainly more life fulfilling.
And it's, as we kind of said as well, it's in this specific example of ultra endurance sports, isn't it? Because you could, as you said, you could get obsessive about 5Ks, and want to get really good at 5Ks. But there is a maximum amount of high intensity training you can do to get yourself, as the best, in the best shape you're going to be.
Exactly. I had a conversation with someone once at a championships I went to, and it was one of those when they started to do multi-sport championships. So there was the cross tri, and there was the aquathlon, there was the duathlon, there was the long course, all happening across the same kind of week, 10 days.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like just doing the aquathlon, and I was speaking to this guy who was doing everything. Like, he was entered into every single event. He was older, like in his 60s, so he could get in. And he was like, why would you travel like this far to come to this country to not do as much as you could? And I said, well, because I want to be really good at one thing. And I know that I've got the time and the energy to be really good at that quite short event. I can train for a half an hour event. I don't have the capacity in my life to train for, well, the long course event, let alone everything that this guy was doing. And that was his take. And I hope that he's very happy and his life is fulfilled and he has lots of harmonious passion. But for me, that just wasn't an equation that would work in my life. And
not discounting the entry fees of all the different races as well.
Well, that's it. That was definitely another factor.
A retirement project.
Yeah, exactly.
So maybe just moving slightly on to identity. One thing they say is that, however, research also showed that high athletic identity can be a risk factor for poor adjustments to events hindering further athletic advancement and performance, such as injury. So flashback to 3 or 4 podcasts ago, we talked about how people tied up in too much in their athletic identity can maybe suffer with injury and things like that. They do go on to say that there are both positives and negatives to having this high athletic identity. But I think it's just interesting that they specifically commented on the injury aspect with regards to it being a negative if you are getting injured.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on athletic identity? I didn't actually get a definition for that, but maybe I want to just dive into that a bit.
No, that's absolutely fine. I think one of the things we've spoken about on podcasts before is this idea of the performance lifestyle team and advisors that have been recognized as being crucial within high performance sport in the UK. And they come in and basically the first thing that they do is this more to me thing, where they'll get, the athlete to put a picture of themselves in the center of a bit of paper, and they will draw everything around them that is in their life, their dog, the holidays, their family, their car, their hobbies, whatever else it might be, everything other than the sport that they are in that high performance system for. So they might also like to play another sport. That's fine. That gets on the board. But the sport that they're in the performance system for doesn't. And it doesn't go in there because the idea is this: if you get injured and you're not able to do your sport, see, it's the idea of having this more holistic identity. I am far more things than just my sport, and particularly for young people, it's so important that we not only identify those other areas, but also help to broaden their horizons. So this paper and others talks about what we can do to de-emphasize the obsessive passion and increase the harmonious passion. And one of them is breed a really holistic, all-round personality. And again, I'm going to say in particularly in young people, but this, I think it applies to everyone, and to indulge them in education and hobbies and a social circle, which means that when sport goes wrong, that's okay, because not everything is wrong. If we are completely, and I use that word compulsion again, because to me it's quite strong. If we have such a strong compulsion to only do our sport, then when the niggle comes, instead of listening to that and going, it's okay, I won't train today, I'm all right without doing that training. Or even, I'll tell you what, I'll go to the gym or I'll go for a swim instead of going for a run, because we have to do it. The compulsion is so high in us. Then we're going to get injured. We're just going to keep pushing in to the way that we're compelled to do, rather than looking around and going, what else could I do physically? And also, who else am I other than this one thing? If we can draw our identity from a far wider source, then we're less likely, I think, to suffer that injury. We're going to be more consistent. So again, Scott, ultimately, we might be better at our sport and love it more.
I like that. Nice.
Thanks.
Another thing I've moving towards sort of rounding up a little bit, one of the things that they mention a couple of times in the paper is, or they use the word hobby. My thoughts are that maybe this has something to do with, maybe this is in some way linked to passion or how people view what they do. The word hobby to me describes a bit more of a, maybe a pastime or something like that. Whereas I think maybe people that are more obsessive about it, not to the point of detriment, but maybe more obsessive about it, might specifically call it a sport or training or that sort of thing. Do you get where I'm going with that?
Absolutely, yes. Is there a question in there?
There's no real question, just kind of an observation, because I think that's maybe part of it in terms of identity, and I am a triathlete, or I'm an accountant and I do triathlon in my spare time, or how people see themselves. I just thought it was interesting they use the word.
I think that's right. So I hate my sport being described as a hobby. Somehow that kind of does it down. But bizarrely, I think hobbies are really good as well. They don't have much time for a lot of them, but I think hobbies are really good things. I've already mentioned them. I think we should try and think of other hobbies that we can put into our lives. They don't have to be things that take up hours and hours of our everyday. They can be something that we give half an hour a week to. Like, that's probably a good definition of a hobby. So people who are into sport are very good at becoming obsessed and compulsive. And we need to recognize that there is a benefit in not always leaning into that. And I'm speaking to myself, at least the version of me in the past, quite a lot here. So yes, I think it's okay to describe our sport as a passion, but to come back to our point, we want to make sure it's a healthy passion. And part of that is if someone is compelled to run, swim, or cycle a very, very, very long way, I would always be really interested to come back to, why do they need to do that? This is something, again, we start off in our course where we look at kind of mindset ahead of an event or ahead of a challenge. Lesson number one is, why are you doing it? Because if you don't know that, then everything else will shift and be chaotic. If you know it, you can centralize how you do your sport around that one thing to make sure that you tick that box of that motivation, and therefore your passion will be rightly aligned with your sport and how you live it out. I think it's the number one thing that I do with athletes, and I think it's incredibly valuable.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe just, we've got a little bit of time left, quickly touching on happiness. We didn't talk about this as much. Just I found their definition or their explanation of it quite meaningful. I think that so they measure it by subjective well-being, which is looked at in three components. So they say presence of positive emotions, absence of negative ones, and a cognitive judgment of life satisfaction and fulfillment. And again, no direct question, just other than I think that maybe if people are mindful of that, it's not just about, it's a balance of positive and absence of negative emotions.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in our last couple of minutes, let's land the plane and suggest to people who are listening what the key takeaways are. And it is, so I might get you to repeat them. So we want
presence of positive emotions,
absence of
negative ones, and then a cognitive judgment of life satisfaction and fulfillment.
Okay, so is your life satisfactory and fulfilling? And those are questions that people can ask themselves, and they can do that balance. And it's as simple as score yourself out of 10, isn't it? Like, we could just get athletes, score yourself out of 10 on those three things. If you're below 5 on any of them, there probably needs to be some work done in that area.
Yeah, no, I like that. It's really simple, quick way of checking in. No, really good.
And I think for coaches as well, there are some other takeaways, and I'm going to read off my notes a little bit. But, any education that can be done around this is useful, I think, for athletes. That's why the performance lifestyle team exists. Coaches should be aware that if athletes are exhibiting perfectionism tendencies, a high fear of failure, and also if they look at their general life, are they being neglectful to other important areas of their life? Education, family, general health. These are all indicators that someone might be tipping over into that obsessive passion, and that's something that can be corrected through work on identity, could be counseling, could be better goal setting, and all of those things. But I think this is a really interesting area. And actually, Scott, I'd quite like to flesh it out into a course at some point. So we'll see if that happens.
There you go.
At some point
Perfect.
soon.
Perfect setup. And just to maybe just finish last lines just from the paper there. Does ultra endurance passion make athletes happy? They report that it depends, essentially, which is always the case with sports science. Harmonious passion did not appear to play a major role. However, obsessive passion and being unmotivated were the main psychological hurdles to the happiness of ultra endurance athletes. So I think that's as good a time as any to finish on. So I think it is. Thank you very much, Joel.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. We hope you found that podcast really useful. And if you did, then it's just a sample of the information that's available across the Elevate platform. Where we want to drive you towards is the Team Elevate community pages. If you're enrolled on any one of the courses across the Elevate platform, you can sign up. And if you do, then it's the place where individuals like you can come together to grow, share ideas, ask questions, interact with us, and be the first to hear about upcoming courses and exclusive offers. So if you haven't signed up, sign up to Team Elevate now, and we hope to see you there soon.